Welcome to the Fearless Podcast. In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. All right, y'all. Welcome back to episode 4 of the Fearless Podcast. Our topic is going to be the war of federal aggression. How you doing, son?
I'm doing good.
Good. So in a previous podcast, I don't know if it was which one it was, I think it was our maiden voyage. I recommended Tom DiLorenzo's book, The Real Lincoln. DiLorenzo also has another book on Abraham Lincoln called Lincoln Unmasked, and he delves deeper into citations and different things about Abraham Lincoln and why I feel that as an American, right? And I think and even if you're not a American citizen, what we do geopolitically affects everybody. And it's a really important to know these kind of things. And what I want to discuss today is postmodern revisionist history.
Yeah.
And there's there's this idea that, if it wasn't for these stinking commie leftists, and this all started in the 60s and 70s, and if it wasn't for them and make America great again, if we could just go back to the 50s. But in reality, in real history, once we understand what the Civil War was all about, it certainly wasn't about slavery. And we certainly know that how many other countries abolished slavery without a war. That kind of makes the notion foolish on its face. But then once you understand what really happened with this war that the Southerners call the War of Northern Aggression, or what I term the War of Federal Aggression, because everything about the Civil War was all about the federal government imposing its will on the United States of America. And even this notion of the United States of America, it never was the United States of America. It was United States of America. And getting brainwashed so much you even catch yourself saying the United States of America, when the coalition was completely and totally voluntary. And so much of our history has been re-scrubbed and revised, and it plays so importantly into the right-left paradigm and the dialect and the Republican and the Democrat, and before the Republicans, it was the Whig Party. And they feed into each other. And then both of these sides, this left and right of the Hegelian dialectic, they both want to claim Lincoln because he was a great fascist. He was a great commie, so that's why the communists love him. So the reason I think this is so important, and every time I've mentioned the whole Civil War and Abraham Lincoln, you always get these different comments. What are you talking about? Of course, everybody knows this was about slavery.
Well, it's incredible how little people actually know about the Civil War.
Yeah.
It's actually incredible. And all of these people nowadays that are raising such a big ruckus about it all, and they want their reparation, they're even more enslaved and getting enslaved every day that goes by.
Well, that's what's really fascinating.
Like, they don't even know
about the topic, because in the modern day right-left paradigm, it says, this people group has been used by this party, the libtards, and they've been manipulated by the libtards and all this stuff. Meanwhile, if you just read and understand history, this is why, one, history is so important. We need to know history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of history.
This is another little cool fact that I just learned because I've been listening to lots of American history of lately, and I learned this really cool one. It's Dodge City, audiobook, and it's really, really good. And it has a bunch of Native American history in there. So we were fed a lot of propaganda, and I've heard a lot of this, how us white settlers and stuff came over here and killed all the buffalo.
White colonialism.
Actually, it wasn't just us. It was actually the Native Americans would go round them up too in mass droves for only their tongues and their hides too.
Wow.
Not just us.
Wow, but you never heard that before.
Yeah.
And so these are the type of things to create these different dialects and the other dialectics. And the other reason this is important, you hear these guys, modern day guys like Tim Pool, Another Civil War. And I am saying, I'm not disagreeing with the concept. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that they're slicing us all up and pitting us against each other. And they want a conflict, and they want a physical conflict. That is absolutely apparent. What's amazing about getting to know the real history and who the real Lincoln was and his thoughts and ideas and what he really thought and wanted with slavery, and then what he politically said, and then the way that he's taken out of context, or what they do is they isolate what he says in a single speech, and then they interpret it a certain way that is void of the total context of his life and everything. It's so fascinating and important, because one thing they did to Lincoln is they completely deified him, and they turned him. He quoted the Bible many times. And what's fascinating is, prior to being president, Lincoln wrote a book and a treatise against scripture, right?
Really?
Denouncing and mocking scripture. And his one consultant that he consulted, it might even have been, it was his campaign manager, another very wealthy attorney. Lincoln was a very wealthy attorney. He was a railroad attorney. He bought property prior to becoming president. He bought property in Illinois, and then after he was president, and he did his whole mafiosa thing with the railroad. He put the exchange station for the railroad in the town where he bought all this property. The guy was he was a gangster, man.
Yeah.
He was an OG gangster.
Before we get too deep into this, let's go ahead and shout out our sponsors for the podcast.
Sure. So our sponsors for this podcast are thetexasboys.com. So please go over and visit thetexasboys.com. Check out what they got going on over there with some honey or coffee or candles, or maybe some merch if you want to make a political statement like Clown World 2.0, or all Transformers are Decepticons.
There you go.
You can check out our merch.
I just made a couple actual Texas t-shirts that are really, really awesome.
You got some Texas t-shirts.
Don't California my Texas.
All right.
And then the other one was don't mess with Texas too.
Okay. So if you like the Texas flavor, you can get a Texas t-shirt. Also, if you're looking for gold and silver, please call Stacey over at Miles Franklin, 318-564-5823. It's a great opportunity now. If you're looking to purchase gold or silver, there's some great price points. The spread is really good. And I want to encourage you, if you're looking for hard assets, give Stacey a call, have her quote it for you. And they're incredibly priced. It's very competitive. And we appreciate Chris and Stacey and all that they do. Please check them out. Tell them that the Texas Boys sent you. And they're currently banned from YouTube for a week or so. So they're on timeout. So give them a call. And
that's how you know they're legit.
Yeah, that's how you know when you're legit, when you get striked. And that's why we wanted to launch this podcast. We want to circumvent the totalitarianism that's very similar to Abraham Lincoln and the way that he jailed those of any political dissent. He would put them in prison, right? Without due process. And he closed newspapers, and he stifled any type of dissent or any type of dissenting voice.
He was a gangster.
He was a super gangster. He was a tyrant. He was a fascist. And that's why they have this Magog monument to him in the District of Criminals, that he has this larger than life Zeus statue.
Yeah,
and
for real.
There's fascist symbolism all over
Mm.
that. So, you know, why is this all relevant? Well, this speaks to our history. And they always say that, you know, to the victors write the history. And, but when it comes to the Civil War and you think of everything we were taught, right, about
Mm.
how and why, and, you know, basically it's, you know, the South were these dirty slaveholders that
Yeah.
just hated black people and wanted to enslave them. And the North were these noble, um, you know, great, wonderful
Yeah.
beacons of hope and
Christians.
virtue.
Yeah.
When in reality, it was the
Vice
exact opposite of
versa.
that. You know,
Yeah.
you just read about guys like Grant and
Mm.
like William Tecumseh Sherman,
Mm.
and they were just butchers. They were completely and totally godless drunkards. Abraham Lincoln never made any profession of Christianity ever.
Mm.
And he did an enormous amount of quoting scripture,
Hmm.
and he knew scripture just like Satan, and he quotes it just like Satan.
Mm.
And he wanted to create the illusion that he was, and talk about modern day politics. You know, how is this any different than modern day politics?
Yeah.
And the other thing that the Lincoln cult did is they rebranded Honest Abe. You know, there's that whole Honest
Mhm.
Abe
Honest
thing.
Abe, yeah.
And then there's this whole Father Abraham and this evangelical kind of conflation that he did all these wonderful things to save the Union, when what really happened is, and in light of this whole coronavirus thing and lockdowns, right? And then even, you know, the way Trump did that and did all this totalitarianism and pushed UBI into our bank
Mhm.
accounts and then
Yeah.
said, oh, we're going to leave it to the states, right? So now, well, why? Here's a question. Why didn't states have these autonomous rights as it was? All because of the Civil War, all because of the more perfect union that
Yeah.
the Lincoln regime created. And it was,
Mm.
you know, it completely and totally eviscerated the Constitution. That's what's very hard and challenging when you listen to Republicans or conservatives, and many of them like Crowder and all these right-wing guys, and they appeal to the Republican Party, and this is one of our dialectic talking points. We're the ones that stop slavery and all that foolishness, when in reality it was complete fascism, and it had nothing to do with slavery. That was a political pawn, and that was a political sacrificial pawn that was not that had really nothing to do with the subject, but it was a great piece of social leverage, you know. And it was it was the original virtue signal.
Mm.
And now we're seeing this amplified times 1,000, and now we're seeing all of this division, right, and splitting, relatively speaking, over the same topic, right?
Mm.
We have the same topic. And about 10 years ago or so, I predicted a balkanization of the country, right? And then we have this COVID thing, right? And we have this red state, blue state. And once
Mhm.
again, it stays exclusively inside this paradigm. And look how much better the red states did with the blue state than the blue states and all this stuff, right? And it's it's totally great and it's totally fine as long as you stay inside the paradigm. You know, as long as you're not like David Knight, who immediately started calling out the insane hypocrisy of Donald Trump and the lockdowns and the UBI and all these things.
Mm.
And as long as you stay inside the paradigm, in the right left, even Alex Jones is well within inside this paradigm. And the liberals are the commies, and we need these conservatives, you know, to right the ship. But as long as we remain inside that paradigm, there is no fix. There was no, you know, the Republicans after the Civil War didn't fix anything. They completely eviscerated and shredded states' rights,
Mhm.
ceased to exist. And the Jayhawks, redleggers, and the carpetbaggers just ransacked, raped, and pillaged and plundered the South and destroyed it.
Yep.
And then you want to know why these virtuous men who they tagged as outlaws, like Frank and Jesse James and the Unger gang and all these guys who were just trying to there was complete and total and utter lawlessness in the sense of justice, right? And then you wonder why they were painted by Hollywood as these
evil bad guys.
Yeah, this was all vigilante justice, you know. And so much like social justice warriors of today, it's we're watching this repeat itself, and it's fascinating to me. And the more that I think about it and ponder it, there's so much parallel. That is why I think it's so important. And the other thing it does is when you consider the history and you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, the entire reconstructed propaganda history that the government schools belch out and that PBS and Ken Burns and all this repackaged stuff, right, that they belch out. You're like, wait a minute, that's actually the exact opposite of reality. That is the definition of propaganda. And then you have both sides embracing it, right? You have both sides that embrace it and both sides propagate it. It's because it works well within the dialectic. And the problem is when you want to go outside of that dialectic, you know, and when you really start learning, and you learned about guys like Lysander Spooner, right, who was a congressman who was an abolitionist, who vehemently opposed Abraham Lincoln. And interesting fact about Lysander Spooner, he was the first one to, people always talk about the U.S. mail and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And my mail and my roads and all that stuff. Lysander Spooner was the first one to develop a private postal service delivery option. And the only reason it ultimately failed was because the government made sure that happened. But Lysander Spooner, he's written a lot of great works, and he was very libertarian. He was very nonpartisan, and he was a great thinker, and he was an abolitionist, and he vehemently opposed, and he exposed a lot of this North-South propaganda nonsense, even though that it was, he was against slavery. So that didn't obviously make him pro-Lincoln or pro-North. And he exposed a lot of the hypocrisy in that, and he vehemently opposed it. And the reason that this is so important is because it seems like this division is growing once again on a totally different reason and precepts. You know, there was so much pressure on the South, and the South population wise was basically 1 to 3 of what the North was, you know. And when you have a democracy and you have a mob rule, if you are outmanned 3 to 1, you can be outvoted 3 to 1.
Yeah. And then they took all of the freed slaves and then put them all back in there. And we're like, here's a rifle. I know you don't know anything about how to shoot or how to fight, but here you go. Go shoot as many guys as you can.
Yeah. Now compare that
with no knowledge.
Compare that to a Southern invasion of war-aged individuals, right? And they're flooding our country, right? And it's being facilitated.
Yeah.
And there's this whole, fake thing that the Republicans are against it and the liberals are for it. Meanwhile, the whole thing just keeps happening. And then you have these conservative guys that fund, like, pumping these guys further into the country just to show the blue people what's up. It's literally fascinating. And then you get all of these twisted ideologies on why, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, that's terrible. You're raising funds to take these illegals and pump them up to New York City or further inject them to the heart of the country.
Greg Abbott has a website all about it, and it shows you how much money he's raised for it, and there you can donate right there.
Yeah, it's insane.
I'm like, what type of clown world do we live in?
Clown world 2.0.
It's crazy.
So that's why this is so important. It's so important to learn history, seek out history. And I try to look for sources that are well documented, and you're still going to have to sift through it. You're still going to have to do research and get real books. real books are important because they are systematically rewriting things and eliminating them, and the access
changing words
online is being created, and hyperlinks are disappearing, and the entire internet's being scrubbed. And so if it's digital, it can be rewritten,
tampered with,
rewritten or erased, and nobody's any the wiser. So that's why all these things are important. And now we have this social conflict and division building once again. And, you know, prior, Father Abraham was deified as he is the answer and he's the solution, you know. And now we're seeing these Messiah type Republicans and Democrats, and they're, you know, you see, like, for example, Trump's a great example of all this weird evangelical stuff where they'll have pictures of Trump with angels' wings. And this is identical to the same thing that they did with Abraham Lincoln. It's identical. They deify him. And here you have a man, Trump, right, who was at the CPAC or one of these things. He was with Frank Luntz, right? And Frank Luntz asked him about repentance, and he was like, well, I don't have anything to repent of. I mean, the man is clearly not a Christian. And not only is he not a Christian, he became a Kabbalist Jew, and you can find the articles on it, you know, and his daughter married into it and married Jared Kushner, but Trump became a Kabbalist Jew. And there's all kind of articles you can read about it. He didn't do it. He didn't do it where it was unbeknownst to anybody. It's documented. So he's absolutely not a Christian, but he's really great about 2 Corinthians. Yeah, 2 Corinthians. That's a whole ball game. Bada boom, bada bing. That's my favorite. The Bible, you know? And so, but this is, we're watching history repeat itself. And the point is to not be deceived and to have discernment. And the other point is teach your children, right? And we're going to later in this episode, we're going to get into education, but this is all part of the education process. And many people are fearful of teaching their own children and training their own children. And part of that process is finding the resources.
And part of the thing, the main problem is because they're scared of teaching their kids because they actually don't know anything when it comes to history.
Right.
So they're like, oh, well, I couldn't teach him about history because I literally know nothing about it. Like, and if you ask me, I'm going to give you some general Google search, you know, propaganda, like about
And what's
whatever.
more fascinating is to me,
really sad.
Southern people that have no concept of their own history. And here you have Northern transplants, right? And this is actually the basis largely in part of all of this. You know, the reason we were attracted to the South was because of Southern hospitality. The reason for Southern hospitality is because they had originally they had a Christian and a moral basis. You know, the North named the Bible Belt as a mockery. You know, that whole term, the Bible Belt, and that's why Southern people, oh yeah, hillbilly talk like that. It's just dumb little redneck. He lives under a rock. You know, that's why when people mock dumb people, they give them a Southern slang and all that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why, because but that foundation was so strong that it still exists today. Right. Meanwhile, it's 1,000 miles, you know, and people, when you point this stuff out, one, it's irrefutable and undeniable. And two, people act like, oh, well, now you're just being divisive again. No, y'all. I lived there my whole entire life, and that's the way it was. And when I went back to visit, it was that way.
It was still that way,
except worse, you know, and it hasn't gotten any better. It's only gotten worse. And that doesn't mean that the South is perfect. And that doesn't mean you can find a lot of nasty, ignorant people down here. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be nice to you down here. And it doesn't mean that it's puppy dogs and rainbows and lollipops.
There's loads of liberals down here.
Yeah. But I mean, people are kinder. They're more hospitable
in general.
It's just an observable fact. And
unless you go into like a big major
unless
city.
you go into Babylon, and then you have this melting pot culmination
everybody
of all these artificial people in an artificial environment that act completely and totally artificial.
Yeah.
And they act the way they act because they're in a completely synthetic derived environment.
Yeah.
And they're going to act synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get what you get. And, you know, this is the whole interesting part of cities in general. And this speaks, you know, that's where during the Civil War, all the cities were in the North, you know, and all this dense population. And then, you know, all the Unitarians, you know, Christianity in the North was objectively dead, was completely, and it was completely Unitarian. You know, if you just compare the generals of the North and the generals of the South, you know, godless and
literally.
And I mean, this is just an observable fact, and you can read all about it, and it's not hyperbolic. It's absolutely true. And now to this day, you can still observe these cultural differences.
Yeah.
You know, and you can go to these different states and you can observe it as a just, you know,
literally. Just go to a country grocery store.
You just experience it, you know, and it's irrefutable. I mean, it is. And why is it? You know, my theory is this is why. And this is what you can observe. So it's not, you know, it's not like something that you're twisting or anything. It's just, it's completely observable. So, you know, and this all comes from the fundamental foundation of Christianity, and where they did really believe in like honor, and they did things on a handshake, and your word and your family honor and valor was an absolutely real thing. And not only that, it was a commodity. Like, it was like, your last name is this, and you better go and do what you got to do. And you said yes, and you agreed to this, and you shook hands, and it better happen.
Yeah.
And that was an absolute real thing. Integrity was real.
Yeah.
Honor was real. Your yay was yay, and your nay was nay. If it hair lipped the governor, whatever, it did not matter. And you were going to do it, and you were going to represent your family or your name, and you were representing your father and your grandfather. And that was real equity. You know, that was valuable. That had real value. And these people, the majority of them, were poor. And your name, and you used to hear people talk about that, you know, our name's the only thing we got. You know, we have to keep our integrity. We must, you know, retain our name. And we as a family want to honor that position, and we want to hold that position. And as a Bible believing Christian, you know, we have the name of God. You know, if you're a Bible believing Christian, we don't want to blaspheme his name. That whole entire concept of blaspheming his name, it's not just, it is using God's name as a curse word or using God's name lightly, but it is also saying you're a Christian and not having any care to live up to that I am made in God's image. I am a child of God, and I'm an ambassador, and I represent him. So my yay must be yay. My yes is yes. My no is no. If I say something, then let it be, you know. And that's something that we want to model. And, you know, and we tell our children all the time, hey, you know, we're all in this together. We're working together, and we're a family, and this is important. And this is what legacy is all about.
Yeah.
You know, and legacy, is money involved in legacy? Yes. Are assets involved? Yes.
Yeah.
Is land involved? Is business? Are all these different things involved? Yes. But it's just as much our name as a family, you know. And it's not about like going to an institute of higher learning and to get wokeified and to be divided up, and then you're sent and you're like, I just want to get out of here.
Like, and I think the thing is that what us boys have done and our businesses that we've built is totally doable for any. We're not special. Like, I mean, it's totally doable for any other teenagers, and we moved down here and, rice and beans and rice. You made $30,000, your first year. And we just started learning and saving money and different things like that. So, it's not like, oh, well, y'all were well off and you inherited all this money and you were given all this stuff. No, not really. All we lived by the seams of our pants, and then, God pretty much did everything else,
Right. And the one thing we
just
did
living
is
on faith,
took advantage of opportunities and took advantage of every opportunity,
living in the moment.
didn't squander an opportunity.
Nope,
We
never
weren't
did.
more worried about what was on our smart devices. And, it's so tragic and jarring when I see children and young adults on these devices and they're completely connected to the internet unfettered, and their parents, these poor children, I have so much compassion because their parents hate them and their parents don't have enough common sense to not nuke their own children. It's so disturbing. And you want to know, and it's interesting as you talk to these same people and they're so astounded of like, how do you do it? And, and we have the parenting class and the boys have the fearless young men's class. And, we have people that participate in that. And then you still get like personal phone calls and like, how do you do it? And then I'm like, and then they're telling me about how all of their children have these smartphones, and I'm like, well, who's paying for them? Well, I am. Well, you're an idiot. You're an idiot and you hate your kids. So it's that simple. Oh, but if I don't do it, I'm going to be a bad guy. Well, you're already an idiot and you already hate your kids. So and oh, that's so mean. And it's true.
It is truth.
The other problem is nobody wants to, everybody's so worried about everybody's feels.
No, you just need to grow a pair and be a man.
Yeah.
Like, really.
You need to
just stand for truth.
Yeah. And be honest, and
don't be a politician.
It's incredible. And don't, children are their oppressors and women
rule
over them.
Yep.
Matt was just quoting that verse the other day, when we're watching, professing Christians that are just so indoctrinated and in love with the modern day pop cultures.
It's incredible. Like, I just spent like a weekend and like I've been watching these kids over the years, just hanging out with different people and stuff like that. And it's incredible with these kids when they have smartphones and how worthless they they've somehow were able to make themselves 100% worthless and know literally nothing other than either their sport that they do, and let alone somehow go to school and pass or whatever,
what's more fascinating is you'll meet a bunch of homeschoolers and they all got their fondle slabs and their smart devices, right? And their parents are like, Mom, I never sent my kid to a day of public school, right? But you gave them that phone and now they have unfettered access to propaganda, filth, trash, 24/7, unfiltered, nonstop.
I have so many young men come up to me and they're always like, they gravitate towards me because I'm different, because I just, I don't look like a gangster or whatever, like a hip hop star or whatever. And they're like, the first thing they ask me,
bro.
Yeah, the first thing they ask me is like, what do you do for work? Like, because I, it just looks like I work,
you don't look like a beach bum or you just crawled out from under a rock.
Anyway, I'm always like clean cut and stuff like that. So, and I tell them what I do and they're like, whoa, that's so amazing, and I'm like, yeah, but it's not really that amazing. I'm like, you can do the same thing. And I never really feel compelled, only with certain people that I can tell, like, they're a hard worker. I want to go learn from them. Let me ask them. 99% of these younger generation kids, I don't even ask them because I know what the answer is going to be. It's going to be like, I work at McDonald's, or I don't work. I'm in school. I'm going to go to college to get some weird degree in something that will never get me anywhere in life.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get all this debt, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And that's their parents' fault.
sadly,
you know, that's
it's all their
fault.
parents' fault. Yeah.
It really is. It's
And
not their fault. You can't,
no,
we can't blame children.
no, it's not
but
their
that's
fault.
why
No.
the Bible says children are their oppressors and women rule
Yeah.
over them. How do we get to that position? There's no leadership. There's no patriarchal leadership. And so children and
Yeah.
women have to step up and fill that role.
And I look at these kids and I'm like, you're not going to be a good, steady husband for a wife. And then I'll look at the other, you know, the young women coming up. I'm like, you wouldn't make a good wife either because you're super unstable.
Right.
And you are like you are a perfect concoction for having several divorcements and everything, like a very miserable life because of just, it's a knowledge problem.
Yeah. It's
big time knowledge problem.
Yeah, it's sad. So, and this all bleeds together with training, with history and understanding real history and not getting sucked into some false dialectic, false paradigm. And, because it's just like people that understand that they need to homeschool their kids, right? And they said, oh, Sunday school and church you can't undo in 1 or 2 days what we can brainwash into your kid in 5 days. But then you'll give that kid an unfettered device to the internet and they can be polluted and propagandized 24/7, 365. And you thought you were doing something valiant by training them and teaching them and homeschooling them. And then you just literally plug them in to the internet.
Yeah.
That is less than zero wisdom.
And we're not saying
incredibly tragic.
If your kid does need a phone of some type, that's what I have a Trumi phone.
There's so many. Look, that excuse is so
like, oh, dumb. You're such a dinosaur. You're telling everybody that nobody needs a phone, and like, how could you do that? No, we're not saying that. There's so many companies nowadays that make phones with either GPS or phone calls. A lot of these parents, sadly, their excuses is because their kids are either going to public school, so then they need a phone for emergencies or whatever. That's their excuse. And then or for GPS or whatever. If they don't have their driver's license, I personally don't think a kid needs a phone.
Right?
Really, because unless
and if you want a phone for emergencies, there's plenty of options for like different kinds of dumb phones and flip phones.
There's and all kinds
of different phones now. It's a very tragic excuse.
James just got a Trumi phone, and it was out of necessity. And he's going to be turning 16 this year and getting his driver's license and stuff like that. But we run a business, and I was finding all the time, I'm like, man, I wish I could just call him, to tell him this, that, or the other, anyway, so I broke down, and me and him got him a phone and pitched in, and and we pay for all that stuff, like everything that we do, we pay for it all. It's not we don't have a sugar daddy that gives us everything. So
you got that right.
We got to pay for.
Got to pay your way.
Pay our way.
And if you pay your way, you're like, okay, I need to make more money.
Everything. You appreciate it.
Yeah.
You don't take it for granted.
You understand the fact that, I need to make more money.
Yeah.
And there's really not time to play games and sports balls right now. If I want to like succeed and I want to set myself up, the sports ball thing is going to have to go on hold, or it's going to have to be like very limited.
Yeah. Like, between growing your own businesses that you can totally, absolutely do, will it be a lot of hard work? Absolutely. The harder you work, the more money and profit you'll make. But then on top of that, mixing that in with family banking, I'm like, it's like the icing on the cheesecake right there. And like you will be so well off by the time I get to your age.
Mhm.
You know, it's going to be absolutely incredible and a really big blessing. But it's all about putting in the hard work while you're young and hustling while you're young. And I think all kids should do that because you have the energy, you have the strength, and that's why I think it's really important for us young folks to focus on our health, you know, get in shape and stay in shape and, you know, keep your, you know, feed your soul by reading the Bible and different things like that, going to church, staying in church, you know, and then on top of that, you know, devouring history and different things like that that feeds your mind and just good wholesome stuff to always be thinking about instead of nothingness in your mind and having all of this weird group chat drama and
Yeah.
she likes her and he likes him and they
Mhm.
just did this and that together and it's like mindless stupid stuff and
And, you
it's
know, if
like
you study the founding
yeah
fathers and how our country was birthed
mm,
by these polymath men that at an incredibly young age were
real
very
men
industrious.
real men
They did all of these industrious things,
mm,
which is why many of them, when they pledged their life, their
mm,
fortune, and their sacred honor, they had fortunes because they were
mm,
nurtured and encouraged to start at a young age, to do all these different things, and they took advantage of the opportunities they had.
yeah
And you can say, oh well, their parents were well off and that's why this, that, and the other. But then simultaneously you can look at all of these different people that have I was just reading an article about the guy that started the butcher box, right? And
yeah
he was an immigrant from Paraguay. He
wow
came here with his divorced mom. They had absolutely nothing. He
mm,
didn't have a dad,
mm,
right? And now this is just a monetary example
mm,
of monetary success, but he took advantage of the opportunities,
mm.
right? And he's successful, and butcher box sold like $500 million last year, you know,
That's
and
awesome.
you know, there he's not using any excuse,
Yeah.
right?
And the American dream is still alive, y'all. And, you know, my American dream, I guess, would be is, you know, owning several different businesses and growing a family legacy. That's my definition of the American dream. And being independently wealthy, you know, and, you know, just the dream is still alive. And I think for the younger generation, it's time to act now because all of these kids, young, all of my generation are asleep,
Yeah.
dead asleep. And out there right now in America, there are people and businesses and business opportunities that are beyond our imagination, you know, and they're just sitting there waiting on a stinking silver platter for you. And all you have to do is get out there and take it and grab the bull by the horns, you know, and ask God, you know, to give you strength and wisdom and not every business decision that you make is going to be the best one in the world. You know, you're going to have failures. So you have to, you know, that's the part about being a man about stuff and, you know, taking the blow, biting the bullet, you know, as they say. So I think, you know, we're living in the craziest time in history, but also right on the same, it's like a double-edged sword. It's like kind of the coolest, neatest time in history too, because there's so much opportunity. I don't think enough people actually see that because they get so tunnel vision on all the bad stuff when there's so much potential out there,
Well,
you know?
and you know, this information, like these different books, like DiLorenzo's two books about Lincoln, you know,
Mm,
that information is much more readily available. Before, when you were an investigative reporter, and DiLorenzo isn't even a historian, he's a Austrian economist, which is what makes his stuff that much more interesting, and which is what makes all of this correlation that much more important when you consider what the communists have done and how they did it, and how the communists would always compare Lenin with Lincoln, and they had Lenin-Lincoln posters, and the communists loved Lincoln because Lincoln was a great communist. He was an awesome fascist. And, and we're talking about kids these days that are asleep, and that's going to segue in to our article this week that this is from altmarket.us. And what it says is the next generation is being groomed for destruction. Here's why they are vulnerable. And what's fascinating about this article is it's still very well nestled inside this left-right paradigm. But when you consider it in light of postmodern revisionist history and the whole North-South Civil War thing, it really, one, you realize why, as long as you're in this dialectic, you're not really going to be able to get out of it, because that's all part of the control mechanism, is this left-right thing. And, and even that basically fundamentally indicates that there's a way that we can vote our way out of it, or politically we can, and that is just completely not true. There is no political solution for this, because in very large way, both parties are very communistic, and when you ignore all the fascist things that Lincoln did, and the Republic and the pillars of the literal star of the Republican Party, how could you ever get past that? If you fail to recognize that, the first thing you have to start with is, what is truth, right? And as Christians, God says, thy word is truth. And if you can't be honest enough to evaluate something that is true, and you want to stay behind some type of paradigm or some rose-colored filter that is your team, red team, blue team, like you're never going to be able to succeed past those ideological glass ceilings and barriers that are within that construct. The past week, the National Education Association, the largest teachers union, so there you go. We were just talking about yellow and how the Teamsters systematically deconstructed and destroyed yellow and their pension and their health care, and now nobody gets no soup for you. The largest teachers union in the U.S. issued guidance on the use of leftist active symbols in public school classrooms. As part of their advice to teachers, they recommend violating district and state rules and hanging items such as pride flags and BLM flags. This is generally cited as a means to start a conversation, a way for teachers to circumvent school rules. They might not be able to spend each day spinning lessons on woke concepts, but if a child asks a question about the flags in the room, they can provide context. The NEA has been one of the primary driving forces behind the intrusion of woke ideology into the public school setting. Well, first off, this whole woke ideology, this all stems from critical theory, critical race theory, the Frankfurt School, critical text. So if any of y'all Christians out there, if you want to know where textual criticism comes from, and higher criticism and lower criticism, and the search for the historical Jesus, and the way that they want to rewrite the Bible in real time through critical text and the Nestle-Aland 30 and the coherence-based genealogical method. This is all predicated and established by, that's wokeism. And that's where wokeism, critical theory, and critical race theory started back in the 1800s at the Frankfurt School. And it's where it all came from. You can trace it all the way back. And this is where critical theory came from. The intrusion of woke ideology into the public school setting. So the whole entire woke ideology came way before there ever was even a National Education Association. Around 97% of their political fundraising goes towards Democrats. So here you're starting to see the flashing the gang signs, right? The right left thing. They seem to be obsessed with the grooming of the children into the leftist fold, with lessons focused on critical race theory, gender fluid propaganda, and socialism. If you want to know where the sudden surge in social justice cultism came from in terms of America's kids, leftist teachers and the NEA are to blame. Yeah, as long as you have somebody to blame, that's cool.
Yep.
You can point fingers at them and they're dumb and they're stupid and it's all their fault. Meanwhile, you send your kids there. Duh.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that the teachers unions, or you don't send your kids there, but you give them a smartphone. The ideology carries all the way across, and you can either be a responsible adult and you can take responsibility and you can do what you're supposed to do, or you can ignore that responsibility and pawn it off onto a device. You can pawn it off to a teachers union. You can pawn it off to a government propaganda camp. You can pawn it off to some clone Christian, air quotes, Christian school thing that clones the Prussian model, right? It's just a clone, but we're going to use Christianese and we're going to quote scripture like Abraham Lincoln, who was absolutely not a Christian. Same thing. It's the same thing. So contrary to popular belief, teachers do not have free speech rights while at work. Woke teachers might fantasize about being Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society, fighting against the system. But the truth is they are the system. There are numerous reasons why rules for teachers' behaviors are necessary. I think the easiest solution is abolish schooling, abolish the government propaganda camps, abolish that, abolish the funding. Narcissists, and when you say that, everybody's like, oh, my kid's going to go. What's everybody in the city going to do? It's just one solution. It's just like when you say, well, grow your own meat, right? Oh, everybody can't do that. What if I'm in an apartment? I don't know. It's a solution. It's one solution. There's more than one solution. Okay. But having one solution doesn't mean you have to have all the solutions.
No.
Our solution on our kids not being programmed by the government and broken woke ideology is to teach our children ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? You can't do that in a Nazi statist environment that it's where it's against the law to do it, right? So maybe one thing is move. And that's a solution. That's one solution. That's not the only solution.
No.
That's my same solution for, well, I can't raise cows in a 6th floor apartment. Well, move.
Yeah.
Go to where there's dirt.
Nobody's keeping you there.
Rent dirt somewhere where there's dirt.
Yeah.
It's very strange how people, well, I can't. Well, now, okay. So if you can't, now figure out a way that you can, but you have to start first with recognizing reality.
Correct.
You can't just be like, there are no weeds. There are no weeds. And you're dumb for pointing out the obvious. Like, you're the idiot. And why don't you have an answer for me? Well, because I'm not you. I'm not in your brain.
Yeah.
For all I know, your brain looks like Swiss cheese. I don't know what's going on up there, and if you spend all your time just absorbing entertainment and trash and the sports balls and all the propaganda, you're never going to find the solution, because there aren't any solutions, because it's somebody else's fault, because it's the NEA's fault, and these leftist liberals, libtards, they're the ones to blame,
and they're programming you to be a useless eater,
cog in the machine. That's the Prussian model. And that Prussian model has been in place for almost 200 years. They see the children in their class as a captive audience that they can feed off of to gain attention, admiration, and justification. They look down on parents as inferiors and treat students as their own personal puppets for molding and controlling. Now, the reason they look down at parents as their inferiors is because they're like, well, these air quote parents are super cool with farming their kids out to us. So they're really stupid for doing that. And that's why you listen to all these like hidden video people caught on video, and they're just like mocking the parents, because the parents are either so distracted, misinformed, ill-informed, or just willingly ignorant that they're totally fine with participating in it. And when you ask them, well, we have to. I mean, there aren't any other choices. And what are we supposed to do? And
Yeah.
what if Johnny wants to play on the baseball team? You know, Johnny might actually get to go to the minor leagues and make $15 an hour, you know, pipe dream stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
In their minds, the kids don't belong to the parents. The kids belong to society.
Government.
Yeah. And that's the Prussian model, right? That's the premise of the Prussian model.
It's really sad.
And you can read Dewey, you can read all these guys the guy that developed the Dewey Decimal System and all these Fabian socialists that set this thing up. And you want to know why it produces communists? Because it was set up by communists.
Yeah. And the thing is this, you know, it wasn't this way, you know, 80 years ago. You know, it wasn't that long ago when there were still morals and different things like that, and when people actually had a working conscience, you know. So we're not that, you know, all we would need is 1 or 2 generations of normal people with morals and actually training up their kids to come back to a real normalcy.
Healthy society.
Yeah, healthy society, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be Christian.
No.
It doesn't mean that everybody's going to believe the same, act the same, talk the same, do the same. But how important is that? You know what I mean? How important is it to just try to, you know, and that's what's so incredible about the Great Experiment. And that's what's so incredible about the founding of our country and the way that all of those things worked out. It's very fascinating, but, you know, relatively speaking, it's gone.
Yeah. And it's not up to the government or the politician, you know, to fix these problems. It's up to you. Your skin is in this game, and it's up to you to make the change. And a lot of people don't like that. And that's why they consume mass amounts of bread and circuses, because, you know, or alcohol too, because you do not want to think about, you know, it's up to you to, you know, change society.
Yeah. How about sugar? You know, sugar is just as addictive or worse than alcohol, processed food.
Yeah.
It's molecularly designed like crack.
Literally.
And it's more addictive than
it
fentanyl.
is the biggest drug in America.
It's the biggest drug in
the world.
And people will literally eat themselves to death. And well, I'm sad, I'm depressed, and when I eat this processed stuff, it makes me feel better for
gets a little bit of dopamine run.
Get my dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Just like my fondle slab when somebody likes my social media post.
Or I find some really funny short thing or whatever.
To distract my mind, you know. To be sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Teaching academics is secondary. Manufacturing new leftist recruits is more important to them. This is the hill they have chosen to die on, and they will not back away from it. They have made it clear that the targeting of children is their paramount concern. To be sure, the woke cult is losing steam lately. Even the kids are starting to fight back against it, with the largest spike in conservatism among high school boys that the U.S. has seen in a long time. They're getting fed up, but there is definitely good reasons why leftists are implementing psychological warfare against America's youth. Let's examine what I feel are the top 3. So this guy, let's see, what's this guy's name? His name is Brandon Smith. Let's go, Brandon. Reason 1, young people are the most economically vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's largely in part because that's the way their parents have set them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The political left relies on exploitation of economic disparity in order to maintain power. The better the national financial situation is, the less leverage they have to keep the population in line.
Of course.
They rail against issues like class inequality all the time, but really the greater the wealth gap, the more power leftists often have.
Yep. Keep them poor.
Gen Z, for example, has been thoroughly sold since childhood. And the thing is poverty is just as much a state of wallet as it is a state of mind. You know, and if you're if you have a poverty mindset, and I'm not talking about prosperity thinking or anything like that, but when we talk about revisionist history, and if you're consuming and not just consuming propaganda, but you're buying all the way into it and you're staying within the narrative and within the paradigm, you are broke mentally. Broke, broke and broken.
Yeah.
You know, so wealth is just as much a mindset and a wealth of ideas and a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of wisdom, is just as much, you can be rich or poor mentally in the same way as you can monetarily. Many of these kids are in their 20s and just exited college, only to discover they have a useless degree in a field with low employment prospects.
Yep.
And on top of that, they owe tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. They feel like they've been conned, and in a way they have. Well, not in a way, like they have exclusively been conned.
Yeah, big time.
And it's not just like, well, if they were just taught Republican conservative ideas, you know, everything would
college
be better.
is the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, and it's been designed that way, and
hence why it's pushed so dang much.
Yeah, hence why it's
the government. Every
subsidized.
Time the government pushes something so hard, you should do the direct opposite. So when they're like, rah, 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 college, you know, run the opposite direction. And people don't do that, sadly.
Nope. Oh, you need to go to a conservative college.
Texas A&M, you got to pass all this woke test.
Yeah.
And I know it's not just them.
No,
it's not just all of them.
Now. And why do you think that is? Because of the benefactors, because follow the money, key bono, who benefits.
Follow the money.
And why would these donors and why would all of these people and all this ESG and wokeism and all this stuff, and it all comes from the top. And it goes right back to the family. And you know what builds the family up or destroys the family? Leadership, headship, the father. And if you don't have a father, you know, look for a pastor, look for a leader, right? Look for someone that can give you wisdom and counsel and guide and direct you. And if you can't, look for another godly man. Right? Because you can't just replace that or ignore that.
Yeah.
You know, they were fed a narrative which tells them that once you hit adulthood, you're entitled to a living wage and a solid career prospects, and that a college degree is the golden ticket to prosperity.
Yep.
They think they've supposed to jump into home ownership quickly, and that life simply adjusts to their needs. And here's the thing. I mean, if they didn't get sucked into the whole dumb paradigm, they might have already had a home of their own. They like the assumption is, well, you should have to wait a really long time to own your home. And that's like the responsible thing. No. They think that this is how it was for the baby boomers and Gen X, and that they've been handed the meager leftovers of a more prosperous era that previous generations squandered. This is nonsense. The fact is, young people from every generation are economically vulnerable simply because they have near zero life experience. That's why you have parents, and have had no time to accumulate savings and property. Most people in their 20s don't jump right into a career and a home or even a viable wage. Every single generation had to deal with financial strife. Gen Z is not special. And here's the problem. When you appeal to patriarchy, when you appeal to headship, when you appeal to authority, and not in a, when I say appeal to authority, I'm not saying it in a fallacy type way, but when you appeal to reality, when you point these things out, hey, maybe you didn't have a dad. You know, my buddy Billy, I'm going to have Billy from the Permaculture Pimpcast on, and he has such an inspirational testimony. His life is incredible, and to come from nothing and to be successful and to have a successful family and a successful marriage and a successful business. I mean, But I promise you, if I ask Billy about being a father, you can only start where you're at.
Yeah.
We can't go back. There are no time machines. This isn't a parallel universe. This isn't all of this uh, relativity. We can't fold time over itself. This isn't a simulation. We can't transcendental our way out of this thing. Right. So when you point out children need fathers, children need fathers that care and that are fully invested in their mother.
Yeah. And are, able to say no to things.
Yeah. And that aren't just able to say no things, but actually take the time to think about things and think things through and think of the ramifications of things and then say no. Not just saying no for the sake of saying no, but you say no, and then now is the time to teach.
Exactly.
Where you say, okay, now look, here's why I said no.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just, there is no why, it's do or die.
Yeah, exactly.
I heard a lot of that stuff from very unintelligent cavemen type fathers, and that stuff doesn't work.
That's how you have rebellious kids.
Yep, total rebellion.
Yep, because they're like, dad just always says no to everything. That seems fun to me, but he never gives me a clear reason why he's saying no.
Right. He has
good intentions, but he's not teaching me anything.
Right.
So,
and that's the whole purpose. Like, if you don't use it as a teachable moment, it's the same thing. Yeah. Like, every mistake that
it does
you make,
more harm than good when you say no.
Exactly. Yeah. and if you're not taking the opportunity, the reason that it's happening is so that you can teach. It's an opportunity to teach. And if you squander that opportunity, it's no different than squandering a business opportunity.
Yeah.
It's no different than squandering like, oh, I just had the greatest idea that anyone has ever thought of in the past 300 years.
Yeah.
Well, if you squander that, it's a terrible idea. It's worthless. It's nothing.
Yep.
It's the same thing. So you have to be so intentional with your parenting, just like as a young man, you have to be intentional with your business. You have to be intentional with everything everything that you do. Do it or don't do it. You got to be all in, but you can't be like doing 80 things at once.
Yeah.
You can't try to do 40 things at once.
No,
you got to focus. Yeah. And that's all part of this training and teaching.
Like you said, you're not raising kids, you're raising adults,
right.
And a lot of people might be like, wow, that's like so much responsibility. Well, it's life. I mean, if you want to be something when you grow up, you got to put in the work and you got to train the next generation. It's the next generation. I don't think enough people think about that. Like, it's literally the people that are going to be moving us forward or actually harming us. Like, it's a big deal. Like, this is not any like silly fun games that we're playing here. It's literally the next generation.
Yeah. This is why homeschooling is so important. And the only way you can control that training is if you have control of it. You can't outsource it. You can't. I mean, have people outsource that and have their children had different types of success. Yes.
Yeah, of course. We are not denying that.
Have people eaten fast food every day, their whole entire life, and live to 80? Yes. Right. But does that fast food, processed sugar-laced food, do you have lots of ailments and underlying issues?
Are you on
problems?
Medication?
Right. Have they already sucked out your gallbladder and your pancreas and, taken out one of your kidneys and all these different things? Yes, that's why there are consequences.
Yeah.
And, that's really, we don't have to finish reading this article because it's very dialectic and there's lots of blame.
This was a serious podcast. This was definitely, and we need to be serious, I think, because this, we live in reality, and reality, we got to be serious. It's not always puppy dogs and rainbows.
Yeah. We can't do the funny sound clips,
as much. Right. This one was just really,
this one was serious.
We just had to hit the nail on the head, with a sledgehammer. a little
Yeah.
bit just to kind of get down to the meat and potatoes. Of
Yeah,
stuff.
and to wake people up.
Yeah.
And it's, you know,
and we're not trying to offend any of y'all, like, by making this.
no, but
video.
truth is truth.
But truth
you
is
know?
truth.
And
So.
it's so disturbing when you see a large group of people and they think that they're doing all these things for good and under the banner of Christianity. And it's just like, relatively speaking, a dumpster fire. It's troubling, and it's jarring, and it's shocking, and it is very serious.
Yeah.
And you know, I hope y'all enjoyed it today. I know that we didn't make you laugh or smile. Hopefully we didn't make you cry. And if you need to cry, maybe it is time to cry, you know.
Won't hurt you.
It won't hurt you. And
no,
you know, our country
reality check
needs some people that care and some people that cry.
Yeah.
And
in a good way.
In a good way.
Not a weird.
So, not in a weird, pink-haired,
TikTok,
scary, screechy kind of way. But I think that is.
I think that's it for the show. For episode number 4. All right, y'all. Stay fearless out there.
See y'all.
All right. Bye-bye.